Data 104, Human Context and Ethics of Data. This course was created 5 semesters ago in the spring of 2018 by Professor Carson, Margo, Boenig, Liptsin, and Ari Edmondson, and we've been teaching it ever since to engage students, to teach students, and learn with students about this transformative moment that we're in. As social scientists focused on understanding the role of technology in the human condition, we recognize that something important is going on today. There seems to be a revolution underway in how people live in the world that comes out of computational and data techniques, as well as the long history of people's decisions, institutional dynamics, social structures, and visions of what is a good way to live. Our premise is that computational and increasingly autonomous techniques that operate on large, ever-evolving data sets are revolutionizing the way that people act in and know the world. Data-driven services and AI-powered devices now shape innumerable aspects of our lives. And these new tools, systems, and infrastructures have profound consequences for how we think of ourselves, relate to one another, organize collective life, and envision desirable futures. In the San Francisco Bay Area today, it's safe to say that we live in a quote-unquote datafied world, a world we all partake in, where data is ubiquitous and informs how we know ourselves and the world, as well as nearly all aspects of our individual and collective life. This class is about how to see and analyze what's at stake in the transformation for individual life, work, environment, in our collective social reality, and how to influence and shape this moment. Now, talking about the human context and ethics of data is a kind of contribution that a humanist and social scientist can make to the discussions of our age. Fields like science, technology, and society, STS, and history and philosophy of science and technology have thought about the relationship between technology and the human for a long time. Our course is a history course oriented towards the present and the future. We think of history not as something just happened in the past, but as the study of human affairs unfolding through time. When you think about history in that way, you can see that if you understand dynamics and can figure out you might be able to figure out ways to engage with these dynamics so that you can intervene in the shaping of the present and future. Some historical examples we talk about, more than examples, historical processes we talk about include the role of Silicon Valley, today's Silicon Valley, and how it began as Santa Clara Valley, which was an agricultural area, right? And how its transformation in the short 100 years of the 20th century informs the way that data science technologies are designed and practiced and imagined today. We talk about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment and the ways in which our current institutions of ethical review emerge from a history of racism and scientific experimentation on vulnerable populations conducted by the government. How these atrocities of the past inform what ethics means in the context of scientific practice, what it means for data science, what kinds of responsibilities it puts on whom. We also talk about concepts like transparency and that value of transparency and explainability in the algorithmic systems that are built today, and how it's important to understand the dynamic and the call for transparency in a long history of this value's relationship and evolution with science, from Enlightenment in the scientific revolution, where conceptions of science arose together with ideas of the public good that they were being brought to serve. How do those dynamics of the past and the slow unfolding of concepts like transparency shape our present day values and practices that we construct in order to realize these values. So we mentioned the concept of the datafied world, that is the core that grounds our class. And we'd like to take a minute to show you how the range of human context and ethics issues that we think about through just one example of the datafied world. Now, this example comes from something that is unfortunately deeply familiar to all of us. It's an image that is a product of the datafied world as much as it is a representation of it. It's interesting and important to consider the ways in which how we know COVID-19 virus and its symptoms, and how we track its spread around the world, how we determine what are the appropriate social policies and when and how to enact them. Our experiences of life during the pandemic, whether working or learning from home, our ability to receive food and necessary supplies without leaving the home, and even how we motivate ourselves and our communities to perform particular actions while keeping our eyes on the quote-unquote curve and the imperative to quote-unquote flatten it. How all of these aspects of our present life and living through the pandemic are profoundly dependent upon data technologies and shaped by decades of shifts in science and culture, by imaginaries of technological disruption and the creation and building of certain kinds of platforms for collective gathering around the world, the possibility of a global connection, by our visions of self-improvement, and by realities of race relations, gender roles, and labor practices that predate the digital era, predate the platforms that we use today and the techniques that we use to understand and act on the virus, but nevertheless permeate through them. So in our course, we're always appreciating how exciting technological developments that strive to make our lives better and define how we live today are. They're incredibly powerful and exciting, and how this possibility, this excitement, is bound up, intrinsically linked to challenging personal and political questions. Now, to study the human context and ethics of data, then, is to learn about the dimensions of the human condition, the institutions, individuals, cultures, and histories that influence and are in turn influenced by data technologies. That's the human context part. It's also an examination of the aims, imaginations, normative ideals, visions of desirable futures that societies pursue with data science and data technologies, and which are themselves reshaped by these technologies. That's what we call the ethics piece. Now, the data science major at Berkeley, with statistics, computation, a domain emphasis, and human context and ethics woven throughout, is part of Berkeley's distinctive response to our present reality of the datafied world. Another element of Berkeley's response, and one that's really anchored in Data 104, is giving students structured ways of thinking about the datafied world. Our course intends not to just raise awareness about issues. That's important. But learning about the human context and ethics and learning how to act in that context cannot stop there. Students need structured understanding of the present, knowledge of how we got here, and how our present shapes the future that we're going into. And giving students structured ways of thinking that can also help them to navigate how to act, whether that is as designers of technologies, as consumers of technologies, as citizens just living and participating in this world. And with this goal of structured ways of thinking in mind, we have created and teach in this Data 104 something that we call the Human Context and Ethics Toolkit. The toolkit is a combination of concepts and methods from the field of SDS, Science, Technology, and Society, and history. And these are used to build understanding of the datafied world, helping students to identify where human power structures and value choices get built into technical work, and empowering them at the same time to discover how, when, and where they can responsibly and effectively intervene. I'd like to give you an example of how our semester looks, the range of concepts we cover and the order in which we cover them. So we begin with this idea of the datafied world, thinking about the historical dynamics that have led to the datafication of the world. What is data science as a field? How did it emerge? What makes data into the thing that we call data? Next, we move into a unit on responsible data. This is a place where we think about the institutions and policies that exist to govern scientific work and work with data by corporations. We also think in this unit carefully about what this institutional context of ethics mean for our present day. Where are they adequate and where are they lacking, just because of the nature of the context in which they were developed and the kinds of technologies which they were addressing. And we think together about what it means to talk about the ethics of data, what kind of questions fall under that umbrella, and what are the challenges for traditional ethics in the datafied world. How we can collectively, we invite students to work with us to collectively develop new ways of thinking about the ethics of data that are practical and useful. Now, after talking about irresponsibility and ethics, we move into the deeply personal nature of data, talking about what it means that data is frequently collected from individuals and about individuals, that data represents individual people. What we talk about practices of the self and relationship of the self through history to technology and to certain kinds of technological practices. We talk about what is at stake in the fact that data comes from individual persons and what happens to identity in the presence of ubiquitous data analytics and predictive analytics. From attention to the individual, we move to thinking about our lives together among others and collectives. We talk about the convergence of statistics and the nation state, the historical fact that the science of statistics comes together with a need to govern large and disparate populations. We talk about how data has been used throughout centuries to govern and surveil, watch over populations, and what are the limits of these previous projects, and what are the similarities and differences to our present experience of surveillance. We talk about the embedding of data practices in our lived realities in cities, such as around smart cities, and into our kind of collective management of life and of order and violence through policing. After thinking concretely about these modes of collective life and how they're transformed and informed by data, we move into the sphere of democracy, thinking about the relationship between data and democracy. This is a particularly important topic in this year, but it is always throughout because of the way in which data today plays a core role in the transformation of the public sphere. So we talk about the role of the public sphere through the centuries and its relationship to different media technologies, and what's different and particular about the present, about a world in which content moderation performed by under certain labor conditions around the world, frequently within private corporations, plays a role in the formation of the public sphere and the shaping of public opinion. What's at stake in that? What kinds of affordances that present? What challenges to being a democracy? We talk about the persuasion of data arguments and the role of visualizations in making arguments with data and telling stories with data. And we talk about how constitutional order shapes technology And technology reforms the foundational balance of power that constitutions provide, so that relationship between law and technology. Of course, we also consider the carrying out of elections and that the specific task of democracies and the role of data in that. In our unit on scientific research, we step back to thinking about the way that how scientists know the world is being shaped and informed by data. What do the experiences of students, graduate students, young scholars in different disciplinary fields now that touch upon data science tell us about what data science is and how data science informs different disciplines? We think here also about the core values of data science as a practice, values like openness, transparency, reproducibility, explainability, and how those are being put in practice, how those are challenged through the institutional structures that in which science is done, such as the academy and its relationship to industry. Now, from beginning to have this conversation about the relationship between academy and industry, we move to a unit on machines and industry. Here, we consider the historical context and the cultural baggage that comes with the Silicon Valley, a place from which many of these technologies and visions for how they might be used and what world they might lead to emerge. We talk about here also the role of robotics and the material dimensions of data, as well as the issues of labor and environment. And how particular local workings out of labor practices and inform global dynamics. And finally, we conclude with a unit called the ethos of making, which really comes back to our premise that working with technologies, designing technologies, participating in technology societies where technology is ubiquitous is a form of world making. So there's much more at stake than just designing a particular technology for a particular use. It's about creating realities in which some people belong and others are from which others are excluded, which enable certain kind of realization of certain futures and foreclose others. And we talk about what are the practices and the visions of the good life attendant to the kind of making of data science that students aspire to in their own professional careers. Now, it's important to not just talk about the course overview in terms of intellectual topics and content, but also the mechanics of the course. And here, the first thing I'd like to point out is the really, as you have already seen, the really core role that history, applied history, and STS play in the course. It's a course that's grounded in the worldview of the interpretive human sciences and humanities. And so the faculty that teach the course, the instructors, as well as the graduate student instructors, need to have a background in this way of seeing, because otherwise this material is difficult to convey persuasively to students who frequently come from a different way of seeing the role of technology. So it's to say about the importance of this kind of collaboration between the interpretive social sciences and humanities in the university with the engineering and computing faculty in order to create this course and to really and to effectively teach it. The course consists of 3 50-minute lectures for the duration of the semester every week, and one mandatory 1.5-hour section discussion that's led by a graduate student, about 25 students in each section. And these discussion sections are mandatory and really the core piece of the class, because that's where students get to speak with their peers about issues that they're learning about in the world and which are difficult to make sense of. They get to practice articulating their position on the issues and listen to others articulate theirs, and through deliberation together arrive at learning and insight about what one can do. So that space is valuable and irreducible. It's something that students find to be the most important and interesting piece of the class. And that's why we're particularly thinking hard this summer about how to transform the section experience into an online space effectively, and welcome others who have this interest and challenge to join us in thinking about it together. Now, the student assignments are, there are three types of assignments. One, the first is reading notes, which is really just an assignment to help students to work through systematically what they're reading. Some of the readings are op-ed pieces from the New York Times and other public media sources. They are more easy for students to understand, but require them to think critically about. Other readings are difficult. They're readings from social sciences and philosophy that are technical in a way that students might not be familiar with and have sometimes, frankly, the patience to work through. So the reading notes help them to identify what are the important ideas in the readings, what are the arguments, who is making the arguments, what are the positionalities of the people who are writing these, what are they trying to achieve with them, and to link the readings, therefore, to their own thinking and their own projects. The reflection exercises are another space for really connecting the individual student to the broader issues of the class. We ask students to just reflect upon issues of their own engagement in the datafied world, think about what kinds of things they are interested in, or what assumptions about ethics they bring to the class, what kinds of things are they looking for in the class, and to take stock during the course of the semester on how they are on their progress towards that kind of learning, or how they're reframing the questions that they brought to the class from the beginning. And that is really a preparation, that kind of a putting themselves in the class and thinking about the class and themselves as a learner is preparation for this capstone assignment of the course, which is a vignette. It's a very short assignment in the end, only 1,000 words, but we work through on it throughout the semester. We scaffold that assignment for students, allowing them to come up with their own topic about the human context and ethics of the datafied world that really speaks to them and that they have a personal connection to. Allow them to research literature and write up an annotated bibliography about the topic, collecting sources and looking at how they're being argued. Then to write a draft that they peer review with their peers and have their instructors reading throughout. And finally, to come up with a polished, persuasive piece of a short 1,000 word op-ed kind of piece that's targeted to a particular audience, and where students' role is to practice leading as an expert in the field of data science and in the human context and ethics of data, engaging their audience to collectively make sense of a difficult issue, to not provide a technocratic answer or a simple solution, but to help lead the audience along learning about that issue and thinking together, deliberating together about an issue. And that's really a core piece of what we're after, which is to get students to articulate, to put words to challenging issues, to have the vocabulary and structured ways of thinking, to communicate this to others, and in a way that helps collectivities work together towards a quote-unquote solution, or something that moves us all forward. So in conclusion, I'd like to share with you some heartening comments that students are making about the class. One student said that, quote, "I plan to go into the tech industry one day, so the social side of issues affecting not only data, but communities of color and people of different backgrounds like myself is important for me to learn from and understand." Another student reflected upon how, in order to fully understand a complex issue, it's important to understand its provenance and history, the various power dynamics and agents, and the underlying ideologies that drive their causes. And a third student noted how the course has really informed their choice of career. So they're saying that they had turned down an opportunity at a large tech company in order to join a smaller, tighter-knit team where I would have more opportunity to set good practices, ensure data quality and privacy, and generally have more say in defining what good standard practice is with data in the company. I think I was aware of a lot of issues, but could never really put it in words. And now I have the vocabulary to speak about it in an educated manner with people who specialize in the area. So that's all three of these, I think, point to the importance of being able to name things, articulate students' intuitions, put themselves in the situations, grapple with it, and lead others, communicate with others in about what to do about it. So some heartening words here. Now, everything that we do in this course and in the Human Context and Ethics program is available for sharing, and we actually learn so much from collaborations that we have with others who are looking to build something like a human context and ethics course or a set of courses or lessons into their universities. We have syllabi, the syllabus for this course available. It includes lecture topics, readings, descriptions of assignments. We have the Human Context and Ethics Toolkit up on our website and curriculum that uses it. And this is curriculum, and we're putting out more curriculum this summer. And please do get in touch with us if you're interested in specific lecture slides or recordings of lectures and rubrics for assignments. We'd be happy to share these. And we really do learn about together kind of what works in this space, what are the kind of different and rich ways to bring students to grapple with these really profound and important questions of the datafied world. Oh, thank you, and looking forward to hearing from you.